Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Book Club of California's Southern California program titled Not Your China Doll, The Wild and Shimmering Life of Anna May Wong. And thank you for joining us here at Pasadena Heritage's beautiful and historic Blinn House. We love having our programs here, and I like to just mention that to anyone here from the Blinn House so they know that we love being here. My name is Kevin Kosick, and I'm the Executive Director for the Book Club of California, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all and host the program this evening. For those of you that might be new to the Book Club of California, we are a nonprofit, member and donor-supported organization that is dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of the book and the book arts. Oftentimes we do that with focus on the history and the literature of California and the West. The book club publishes limited edition, finely made books. We have a scholarly journal, and we have keepsakes. We host a year-round series of exhibitions and programs like the one this evening on topics including fine printing, design, typography, bookbinding, collecting, California history, and so much more. Now, if you're not a member of the book club, or if your membership has lapsed and you're interested in what we do, please consider joining our century-long tradition. The book club wouldn't be able to do the work that we do without the support of our members. Membership dues are modest and the benefits are many. I invite you to find out more about the book club online at bccbooks.org. You can join that way, you can donate, and you can just find out more about our history, or you can take one of the program calendars that are on your table. And now for tonight's program and our presenter. Again, the program is titled Not Your China Doll, The Wild and Shimmering Life of Anna May Wong. And our speaker is author and photographer, Katie G. Salisbury. Now, Katie G. Salisbury is a writer, a photographer, and a fifth-generation Chinese-American right here from Southern California, but she now lives in Brooklyn. Is that right? But she still has family and friends here, and she'd love to come back and do this program for us. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, in Vanity Fair, The Believer, the Asian American Writers Workshop, and many, many other places. As a spring 2017 TED resident, she gave a TED Talk that you might have heard of, titled As American as Chop Suey, about her photojournalism project on Chinese restaurant workers in New York. The photos and the stories of these workers were then collected and put into an exhibition called Thank You, Enjoy, which began touring the US in 2018. She was also a 2021 finalist for the Jerome Hill Artist Fellowship Program. Now, Katie is the author of Not Your China Doll, which you see here on the screen, a biography of Anna May Wong, the first Asian American movie star. Anna May Wong and Not Your China Doll are clearly the subject of her talk tonight. I love this part of your description of the book. Before Constance Wu, Sandra Oh, Awkwafina, and Lucy Liu, there was Anna May Wong. Do you all know who those people are? They're like so ingrained in current popular culture. In her time, Anna May Wong was a legendary beauty, a witty conversationalist and fashion icon. She was plucked from her family's laundry business in Los Angeles and rose to stardom in Douglas Fairbanks' blockbuster titled The Thief of Bagdad. But when Hollywood repeatedly cast her in stereotypical roles, she headed abroad in protest. She eventually returned to challenge Hollywood by speaking out about the industry's blatant racism. She used her new stature to move away from her typecasting as the China doll, or dragon lady, and worked to reshape Asian American representation in film. Tonight, Katie G. Salisbury will tell us all about this vibrant and radical, groundbreaking artist. Now, if you have questions for our speaker, please wait till the end. It's about 45-ish minutes, we think. And we'll have time at the end for a Q&A, and I'll come back up to help host that. So now, it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Katie G. Salisbury.
Thank you all for being here. It's great to be home again. again. I actually grew up in Arcadia, just down the road, and so spent a lot of time in Pasadena. And every time I come back to Southern California, I wonder why I don't live here. But so here I am to speak about Anna May Wong, someone I've been interested in for the last 20 years. So I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of her life and her career, and then we can chat a little bit more about questions people have. Do I need to? Oh, there we go. Okay. So who was Anna May Wong? She was born Wong Liu-sung in 1905 in Los Angeles, actually on Flower Street, not far from where the Bonaventure Hotel is today. And her Chinese name loosely translates to Frosted Yellow Willows. She was a daughter of a laundryman, and both her parents were born in Northern California, so she's a second generation Californian, third generation Chinese American. She was also the first American-born Asian film star to play a leading role in a Hollywood production. Hence, I call her the first Asian American movie star for short. And across her 4-decade career, she worked in basically every single medium: silent, films, talkies, radio, theater, and television, and achieved many firsts along the way. Pressing hard enough, okay. So here we have actually a photograph of the Wong family, circa 1925. Anna May Wong is actually the woman on the far right in the back, behind her father, Wong Sam-sing. As you can see, it was a large family. She was the second eldest. Her oldest sister, Lulu, was on the far left. They were very close growing up. But this was actually her father's second family. He had a first wife in China who remained there, and a son by that wife. But they didn't want to come to America, so she said, well, you can marry someone else in America, and he did. So he started the Wong family of Southern California, and he was a laundryman by trade, so he had a laundry called Sankey Laundry on 241 North Figueroa Street. And as most immigrant families will tell you who run small businesses, the children, when they're not busy at school, are usually helping out at the business. So Anna May Wong and her siblings were no different. So when they came home from school, they were helping out. She balanced the books. She and her sister would make deliveries to clients up and down the downtown area. And during this time, when she's about 5 or 6, 1910, 1911, that's just around the time when film studios in the East Coast start to move out to Los Angeles, because they realize, well, we can shoot films all year round because the weather is so great. And they have all these different scenic venues, the mountains, the beach, Spanish missions. So she's seeing these film studios pop up in the middle of downtown Los Angeles, in Chinatown. They're just filming in the streets, oftentimes in Chinatown, because it's free atmosphere. They don't have to create a set. All they have to do is show up. So she's totally intrigued and fascinated by these people who are play acting in the streets. She starts saving the pocket money she gets as tips from customers, or she'll skip school and take her lunch money to go watch the films at the Nickelodeons, and she's watching them from end to end multiple times, and then racing home to reenact the things she's just seen in the mirror. So from a very young age, around 11 or 12, she's decided, I'm going to be a movie star, and because she's right there when it's happening. So pretty soon, I'd say, well, by the age of 14, she gets her first job as an extra in Ali Nazimova's 1919 film, The Red Lantern. So she gets her foot in the door, although she takes her friends to go watch the film, she can't figure out who she is. She's just an extra. But that does not deter her, and pretty soon she's making connections with other directors. They're giving her bit parts. So here we see her at 15 in a supporting role in Dinty, which was directed by Marshall Neeland, who became a good friend of hers, directed her in several films. And the interesting thing about this period is, she was very open about her working class roots and her background. She's proud to be Chinese American and proud that her father ran this laundry. So if people wanted to get in touch with her, they would call her up with laundry, and the reporters soon came calling and interviewed her, and were really, fascinated by this young woman who had no pretensions. She was very humble, still working hard at her father's laundry, even though she could earn more money as an actress. And the other thing they really noticed about her was that she wasn't anything like they supposed a young Chinese maiden would be, right? She was a thoroughly American young woman. And like any young American woman of her era, she was a flapper. So she spoke in all the jargon, she wore her cloche hat and her short skirts, she danced at Charleston, And that was kind of endlessly surprising to all the reporters. So it's really fun to read some of those early interviews with her because they're always describing her as a China doll, and then she opens her mouth and ruins the illusion. And then you see at the far right, there's a photo of her kind of dressed in one of her flapper outfits later on in her career in 1928. So two early films that were really important in her career, the first of which was The Toll of the Sea in 1922. It was actually the second Technicolor film ever made, and she got the starring role at age 17, which is kind of a bit of a fluke, very incredible for someone that young. What happened was the people who were making it were primarily the scientists at Technicolor. So they weren't as interested in having like a box office star. They wanted to show off the color technology. So they chose to tell a tale set in China. It's basically a Madame Butterfly story, but set in China, because they wanted all these lush backdrops, the costumes, the embroidery, all of that. And so because they wanted it to also look authentic and natural, they cast Asian actors in the roles. So she gets this kind of once-in-a-lifetime role, and no one's expecting much from it because it's Madame Butterfly. Everyone's seen it a million times. Mary Pickford's done it, Norma Talmadge has done it. It's been done. It's boring. But she surprises them and gives this virtuoso performance. She's crying buckets, in front of the camera without the aid of glycerin or anything. And even the New York Times raves about it. They say, this is a performance that 9 times out of 10 is botched. But she's the 10th performance, and she deserves to be seen again on the screen. So she gets these rave reviews, and she gets noticed by Douglas Fairbanks, who sees a screening of this because he's really interested in technology. He wants to make a color film. It's not ready yet, but he sees her and realizes, oh, she'd be perfect for this other thing I'm making, which is The Thief of Bagdad, 1924. Huge blockbuster based on an Arabian Nights tale, and he casts her as the Mongol slave, which becomes her unlikely breakout role. She doesn't have a huge amount of scenes, but she has enough scenes that are very slapsticky and memorable, and that really catapults her to international fame because that film was seen all over the world. And I do have a few short clips I can play. I forgot to ask if there's sound, but they're not sound films, so it doesn't really matter. So if it works, it works, and if it doesn't, it's okay. But I'll play a few clips from her early films. So you can see she's dazzling even at 17. See all those tears flowing. So one of the other interesting things that happens early on in her career, she has to navigate what it means to be a Chinese American woman and an actress as a Chinese American. So around, I think this is 1926, she pens a two-part memoir series that explains kind of some of her story and who she is and the kind of background that she's come from. And I just love this quote from her where she says, "I'll explain as best I can how it feels to be an American-born Chinese girl, proud of her parents and of her race, yet so thoroughly Americanized as to demand independence, a career, a life of her own." These are really radical things for a woman to say in 1926, let alone a Chinese American woman. So I think it's really, you get such a strong sense of personality from her, and at this point she's only 21 when she writes this. Of course, the other thing that comes with being Chinese American is the fact that she's living under the Chinese exclusion in the US, meaning anyone of Chinese ancestry, whether or not you're a citizen or a resident or an immigrant, you're basically, all of your movements are controlled by the government. So every time you leave or enter the country, you have to ask for permission, you have to have the proper papers, identity papers. And so she discovers this rather rudely on a production in 1924. She's part of the cast of a film called The Alaskan. And instead of filming it in Alaska, because that's actually pretty far away, they decided we'll just film it in Canada, we'll go halfway there. So she's on this crew along with James Wong Howe, a Chinese American cinematographer. So there's two Chinese Americans on this crew, and they're in Seattle about to board a ship going to Canada when they realize they don't have the correct papers. And if they leave without them, they may not be allowed to come back into the country because they can't prove that they have status. So somehow, very quickly, the studio smooth things over, they get the papers, and this is why we have records here of her identity papers being issued at the port of Seattle in 1924. So that's her first brush with the laws of the land that constrict her as a Chinese American. And so the document on the right is actually Form 430, which is the application to request to leave the country when you want to go on a trip. So that's one that she applied for in 1927. She wanted to go abroad to Europe. So throughout her lifetime until the Exclusion Act was repealed in 1943, she had to apply every single time she wanted to leave or enter. And then also on entry, she was interrogated, even as a movie star. So at the same time, now she has a name. She's made a name for herself in Hollywood. Productions want her, they're putting her in various roles. They're billing her with some of the top people in each film, but they're not giving her much screen time, and they're relegating her to these somewhat stereotypical roles. She's always playing floozies or the so-called dragon lady, or she's kind of the helpless Chinese maiden who needs to be saved by a white savior. And very often, because of the role she has, she dies in the film. She either dies at the end, sometimes she dies in the very beginning, which is what happens in The Chinese Parrot. It's funny because she's in the advertisements for the film, and she only appears in the beginning, and then she's killed off. This other publicity still in the right-hand corner, I always think is kind of funny. There's different versions of it. In one, she's teaching Renee Adderey how to use chopsticks, and this one, she's supposedly teaching her how to read Chinese. And this is for a film that they made in 1927 called Mr. Wu, and Renee Adderey played the lead along with Lon Chaney in Yellowface, whereas Anna May Wong was just playing a supporting role. So again and again, she's getting chosen. Other white actors are getting chosen over her to play leading parts that are really Asian characters, and so she gets quite fed up with this. And she says, in an interview in what is it, Screenland. She says, "To tell the truth, I'm Chinese by race, and I love Chinese people and things. My only regret is the limitation upon my work, as I can only play Oriental roles, or sometimes Indian parts. Hayakawa's stardom failed because he was never allowed to kiss the heroine. The fans wouldn't have stood for it." And this is one of the reasons they keep telling her, "Sorry, Anna May Wong, we can't put you in leading lady roles, because you'll be opposite a white actor, and you can't have a happy ending if we do that, because you can't kiss, you can't marry, it's illegal in almost all the states of this country to marry a person of another race, so we can't show it." So then her interlocutor says, "But surely no one objects to seeing an American kiss a pretty little Chinese girl." But she responds, well, not if she's impersonated by an American. But someday, she comes back brightly, someone will write a story demanding a real Chinese girl, then perhaps I'll have my chance. So she hasn't given up on things, right? She thinks, well, one day they're gonna realize they need someone like me. So, being fed up with Hollywood, she gets an offer from UFA, which is the premier German film studio in Berlin. And it's a big risk if she takes it, right? She's 23, she could leave Hollywood and never come back. Or she comes back, no one remembers who she is, no one will give her a job. It's a huge risk. But knowing Anna May Wong, she has an appetite for risk. She asks everyone what they think, she considers all the options, and then she says, I've made up my mind, I'm going. So her and her sister Lulu go together. They sail to Germany in 1928. That's a picture of her arriving in Berlin, and she's really embraced almost immediately. And the first film she makes is called Song. They actually retitled it in homage to her Chinese name, Wang Liu-song. So Song is meant to be her Chinese name. And you know, as soon as that film comes out, she becomes a huge sensation in Germany. And this kind of repeats itself as she crosses the continent. So here we see her in London, in Limehouse, which is kind of their Chinatown at the time. She's, you know, modeling Chinese embroidery and silk pajama suits, which become all the rage. All of these different artists and photographers are lining up to paint her, to photograph her. So she's in the magazines everywhere constantly, and there's a bit of a craze for every chinoiserie because of her. And then by 1930, so she's in Europe for about 3 years. By 1930, she's making her first sound film. And at the time, you know, sound films, they didn't have dubbing. It was very rudimentary. This is one of the first sound films ever made in Europe. So instead of, you know, overdubbing it from English, they say, well, we're gonna make it in 3 different languages, 3 different times. So she learns German, she learns French. So she does an English version, a French version, and a German version, and sometimes with different cast members, right, who are fluent in the language. So, I mean, how's that for not only making the transition to sound, but doing it in 3 languages? Oops. Okay, this is actually one of the great silent films she makes in England called Piccadilly. And it's a really fun film because it, in some ways, mirrors her own life. It's about a dishwasher who scales the heights to become a star dancer at a nightclub in Piccadilly Circus. So you can see kind of the transformation there, very much like her working in the laundry to become a Hollywood movie star, was a huge hit in Britain. So during this time, you know, of course, Hollywood is starting to hear, oh, maybe we messed up. Maybe we shouldn't have let her go. And she even gets like an offer to come back and do some film, and she very shrewdly decides to publish her response, I think in the Los Angeles Times. It says, oh, thank you so much for your offer. Don't think I'll be back home before Christmas. I've just made this fabulous film in Berlin. I got a standing ovation for 20 minutes. I'm also, you know, making my theater debut on the West End in England, and this and that, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, you get the picture. She very diplomatically says, you know, no thanks. So by the time she is ready to come back to the US, people are kind of ready for her. They want to give her some opportunities because they feel like they've missed something. So actually, as soon as she gets off the boat in New York, she had intended to go straight to Los Angeles by train, but there's a theater producer who stops her while she's still in customs and asks her, will you please play a part in this play on the spot, on Broadway. It's due to open in 2 weeks. Do you think you could do it? So she immediately, she signs on, she spends 2 weeks learning all the lines, and then she opens on Broadway. It turns out to be a huge hit. And you know, she does wonderfully in it. I think it's on Broadway for almost 5 months. She travels it to cities across the US. She even brings it back to Los Angeles and San Francisco. Hugely successful. And so by the time she gets back to LA, Paramount is ready to give her a 2-picture deal, which they do. And the first of those is The Daughter of the Dragon, which is a Fu Manchu story, and it does involve some interesting actors, like they bring Setsu Hayakawa back. He's been gone from the country, so they bring him back from Japan to be in this, his first talkie. He's kind of the good detective and the love interest. But Anna May Wong is the daughter of Fu Manchu, so she's very maniacal and evil, and this is really the prototypical dragon lady. This is really, this film is where it comes from. So it's a bit of a, in a sense, a missed opportunity. I mean, the one thing that is great about this film is that she really gets the star treatment. So Travis Banton, legendary costume designer at Paramount, he's done these incredibly beautiful costumes for her. There's so many of them. It's worth watching just to see the costume changes. But it is a little bit of a, it's sometimes there's good camp and there's bad camp, and this is kind of bad camp. It's really over the top. And then here also is a publicity still of her from this film, and she had this catchphrase which she would write sometimes on her photos, "Orientally yours," which was a bit of a wink at people. So the second film she makes at Paramount is Shanghai Express, 1932. And although she's not playing the lead, she's playing an important supporting role to Marlene Dietrich. And the interesting thing is that, well, of course, there's this famous photograph of the two of them along with Leni Riefenstahl, which was taken at a ball in Berlin in 1930. Presumably they met there, they might have met previous to that. They were all making films at UFA at the time. There's been lots of speculation over what this photograph really tells us. One thing I do know is that when they first met in Germany, Anna May Wong was the most famous woman in that photograph. She was famous in Hollywood, and now she's become famous across Europe. So Marlene and Leni were really only known within circles in Berlin or in Germany. Marlene had yet to go to Hollywood, but by the time they're making Shanghai Express together, just 2 years later, the tables have really turned. Marlene has been brought by Joseph von Sternberg with this huge contract. She's getting paid tons of money, and she has all, everything that goes with that. And this is really a star vehicle for Marlene Dietrich. But it's a fantastic film, great dialogue, very witty and funny, and in many ways, Anna May Wong subtly steals the show. So the way I usually see their relationship is more as what I would say professional rivals in that sense. And this is a great photo to the right of the entire cast. You see Anna May Wong and Marlene Dietrich towards the end, and then in the man next to Anna May Wong on her left is James Wong Howe. So he didn't work on the film, but he had gone to China several years prior to that and taken footage, which he never got to use. He was trying to make another film and he never got to use it, so they ended up using the B-roll as the background for the train. So when you're watching Shanghai Express, all of that footage in the background is from James Wong Howe. I have a short clip, but I'm not sure if you're going to hear it. I mean, you can see.
Let's try.
Oh, I think it's not connected, so. Sorry, we have to skip that, but it's on YouTube. It's a famous scene from Shanghai Express. So during this time, unfortunately, after Shanghai Express, her Paramount contract doesn't get re-signed. Daughter of the Dragon was not successful. I mean, it wasn't a good story. It didn't sell. It was very stereotypical. And then Shanghai Express, of course, was from Marlene Dietrich. It wasn't an Anna May Wong film, so they don't renew her contract. And then in 1932, even though there's a bunch of films that are being made about China at this period, because there's the Japanese and the Chinese are kind of somewhat, well, it's not war, but there are things going on between them, so it's in the headlines. So there's a ton of China films being made, but she doesn't get part in any of them. And it's very frustrating. So as you see here, she writes in a private letter to her friend Carl Van Vechten, made a test at Metro Goldwyn Mayer Studios for the leading role in Son, Daughter. I guess I look too Chinese to play a Chinese because I hear Colleen Moore is going to do it, although no definite decision has been made. And actually Colleen Moore was not the one to play. I'm forgetting her name now, but it's a different actress who you see there, and then Ramon Navarro playing the other character. So because of that, she's like, okay, I see how you are, Hollywood. You're going back to your old ways. So what she does is she creates a cabaret act, and she goes to Europe and she tours it for several years, very successful. She wasn't always the most talented singer, or dancer, but she certainly knew how to entertain an audience and how to keep them enthralled. And so she designs this whole cabaret act for herself. And at the same time, she gets a couple more offers to make films in England, and she makes Job Ahead, which is actually the first film in which she's allowed to have an on-screen kiss with her white co-star, which is groundbreaking. And it's very much, if you ever get the chance to watch this film, it's very much what I would call Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, but set in the 1930s. Well, it's actually not even, the film itself, I mean, the story in the film is set probably in the 1880s or something. So, but it's basically about marrying a Chinese princess and he brings her home to England. So, also in 1932, an important book gets published by Pearl Buck. She's the son of American missionaries who grew up in China. She writes this incredible novel about Chinese peasant farmers called The Good Earth. It comes out in 1931, and it becomes an overnight bestseller. People are kind of dazzled by it because she humanizes the Chinese in a way that no one had ever done before, and people really relate to them. They're farmers. It's very relatable. So Irving Thalberg at Metro Goldwyn Mayer decides, I'm going to make this film, and it's going to be a huge epic film, and I'm going to do it in this very sympathetic light, the way that the author has written it. So now you would think, here, finally, a film for Anna May Wong. So I go back to that quote. Someday, someone will write a story demanding a real Chinese girl. Then perhaps I'll have my chance. And here is that moment she's been waiting for. And everyone in Los Angeles knows it, right? They think, well, who could play this part? There's only one Chinese American actress that we know, that anyone knows. It's Anna May Wong. And so people are lobbying for her for years because the production takes quite a bit of time. Of course, that's not how it turns out. Instead, they cast two, Austrian, German immigrants in the lead roles as Wong Lung and Olan, the Chinese peasant farmers. Louise Reiner has actually only really just come from Germany a year before. She's still practicing her English. But they're cast in the main roles. And again, it's the same excuse. Sorry, Anna May Wong, we cast Paul Muni, you can't play opposite him, he's a white actor, you're an Asian actor, even though you're both playing Asian characters. We just can't have that. And at the same time, they're making these huge efforts to create an authentic vision of China, right? They've sent scouts to China, they've bought up farms wholesale that they've shipped back to California. They're building a farm in, not Sherman Oaks, but the San Fernando Valley. They've hired all these Chinatown extras. They've studied the hairstyles, and they're trying to do realistic yellow face makeup. So they're going to all of these efforts, but in the end, they can't bring themselves to cast Asian Americans in the principal roles. So they make Anna May Wong audition for a secondary role. In the end, she says, you know what, I don't want to be a part of this. Like, you're asking me, and it was not a sympathetic role. You're asking me, as the Chinese American actress, to play the one non-sympathetic role, and I won't do it. So she comes up with her own plan, and it's a bit of counter-programming. She decides that she's going to go to China for the first time in her life, which is, a really big deal for her personally. And she is basically writing a series of essays about her experiences in China that are syndicated, that are in the New York Herald Tribune and then syndicated in newspapers across the country. And she's sharing her experiences as an American going to China to tell people what it's really like. She's also bringing along a cameraman with her, a guy named Newsreel Wong, who's taking footage of her travels and sending them back as newsreels, but also she later takes that footage and creates a documentary, which she narrates of her experiences there. And she's, going out into the countryside and speaking with the actual farmers rather than, these fake Hollywood farmers. So she's kind of creating a split screen. Like, here is Hollywood's China, but if you want to know what the real China is really like, you can come with me and I'll show you. So that's 1936 when she does that. She stays in China for about 10 months. It's a life-changing experience. She comes back a changed woman. And the interesting thing too, the difficult thing about it too, is that in China, although as excited as people are to see her, they also have a lot of criticism for her because they're upset about the way she's portrayed Asian women in all of her films, not really understanding that the parts weren't always her choice. Right. And being who she was a very, she was always trying to improve herself. So she sits there and she listens to all their criticism. She really takes it to heart, no matter how unfair it is. So when she comes back to the US, she says very publicly, I'm no longer going to play unsympathetic parts or anything that make my people look bad. And in addition to that, she says, Hollywood won't hire Chinese actors for Chinese roles. and that's, you know, her kind of code word for Hollywood is racist. And I think that was a really brave thing for her to do in 1936, 1937 that no one else was doing. So she says that very plainly, and the incredible thing is that she doesn't get blacklisted, she doesn't get pushed out of Hollywood. Instead, she goes to Paramount, because one thing she's realized from her travels, she had met up with her friend, Warner Oland, who had become famous for playing a lot of screen Asians, most famously Charlie Chan. And so when he goes to China, he's Swedish, but when he goes to China, the Chinese embrace him as if he's Chinese. They love him, they love Charlie Chan. And they say, you're amazing, you make us look so good. And imagine Anna May Wong, she's like, well, what about me? I'm actually Chinese, what about me? So she realizes, well, why can't I play a female version of Charlie Chan? So she doesn't quite get that exact thing, but she goes to Paramount and they say, okay, you're right, like we want to do a series. They do a series of crime thrillers. They're not necessarily connected, it's not a girl Charlie Chan, but they are, crime thrillers. They're B movies, so lower budgets, but she has a lot more influence and control. She's involved in the scripts. I mean, they're titled, Anna May Wong Project before they have an actual title. So they're her movies. And the first one that she makes in 1937 is with Korean American actor Philip Ahn, who was actually a childhood friend who grew up down the street from her. And it's they're actually playing the two leads of this film, two Asian Americans. So this is the first time in sound films that we have two Asian Americans playing romantic leads. And not only that, all the villains in the film are played by white actors. So she really flipped the script. And in the end, unlike her previous films where she had to die, or had some kind of very disappointing end, she has a happy ending. She and the Philip Ahn character end up together. They get married. And if there's I have a clip. Let's see if I can play it. But she also makes another example from this period. She makes a whole series of films in the late 1930s. Is King of Chinatown, which is about a fictional biopic about Dr. Margaret Chung, who was the first Chinese American doctor. So she's really doing a lot of things to shore up the image of Chinese Americans just as we're heading into World War II. So this is a clip from Daughter of Shanghai. Let's see if it's, okay, that's not gonna play. Sorry. Well, you can look. This is the ending of the film, and what's so remarkable about it is it's the very romantic ending where they're driving off into the sunset. These two people together, and the last couple of lines are actually spoken in Cantonese without subtitles. So again, pretty revolutionary and radical for that time. I'm not sure if people realize that, but definitely a groundbreaking moment. Okay, so following the 1930s, work starts to dry up a little bit for Anna May Wong. I mean, it's also wartime, but she does set down roots in Los Angeles finally, after a decade of traveling back and forth from many places. She buys a home in Santa Monica and she christens it Moongate, named after the Moongate you see in the back behind her. That was one of the things that she really loved, one of the features she loved about Chinese homes and gardens while she was in China. So she tried to recreate that in her own home, and you see her planting many of her exotic plants. A lot of her friends that she met in China they're kind of refugees in a sense, or they've all fled China and come back to the US. So you see her here with Lin Yutang and Bernadette Silt Fritz, who was an American, but she had been living in Shanghai at the time. And she also really throws herself into the war effort, because now she has this connection to China. She's been there, she's met people there, she understands the country in a way she didn't before. And so she's busier than she's ever been, but everything she's doing is for the war effort. So she's hosting parades in Chinatown, different fundraisers. She auctions off her wardrobe and donates the money. And she makes two propaganda films, one of which here is Bombs Over Burma, and she donates the proceeds that she receives to the China Aid. So she's really quite busy during these years, but it's all towards this war effort, not necessarily furthering her career. So things, after the war wraps up, things are kind of quiet. By that time, by 1945, she's 40. And 40 is old in Hollywood in this era, right? 40 means you don't work anymore. So it's a tough time for her, and her looks are starting to go. She's lived a very fast life. She drinks, she smokes, and it's starting to catch up with her. She does have some health problems. She starts to suffer from cirrhosis. In her dark times, she is drinking more, and not social drinking, right? So here's a clipping about her being committed to the hospital in Santa Monica. She actually, during she had a huge blood transfusion and an operation, and after to recover, she was actually sent to Pasadena. It was called the Sierra Madre Lodge, which is not located in Sierra Madre, it's located in Pasadena, which took me some time to figure out. I called several lodges in Sierra Madre before I figured that out. But she came to Pasadena to recover for several weeks, and then she goes right back to it. She realizes what I need to do is I need to get back to work. So in the early 1950s, that's when television is just emerging as this new medium. It's an opportunity for someone like her, right? Because she's not working, and she's always been willing to experiment, from the first, the second Technicolor film that she was in, to going into talkies very quickly. She's willing to be in television, unlike some of the big name stars who don't want to be in television. They want to continue making films. So she actually gets a whole series that is written around her. It's called The Gallery of Madame Liu, which is, again, her Chinese name. And she plays this woman who runs an art gallery and travels around the world solving art crimes. It sounds wonderful. Unfortunately, the tapes don't exist anymore. Dumont Television went bankrupt several years later and supposedly disposed of everything in the East River, New York. We're still hoping that some of the films will turn up someday. But it was a 13-episode series on primetime television in 1951. So again, she was the first Asian American to lead a television series. So we're kind of wrapping up towards the end of her life and career. The 1950s, it takes her a little bit of time to kind of figure out television, but she realizes she has to transition to no longer being a leading lady. She's going to be a character actor. And so she does a number of short episodic television shows. She's in Wyatt Earp, she's in the Barbara Stanwyck show, and then in 1960, she actually makes a comeback in film. And she gets a part in a film called Portrait in Black. Of course, she's playing the maid, so it's not like her earlier roles, but there's dignity in working, and I think she was brave in that way. Despite having aged, despite having not been on the screen, she felt it was important to get back to work. And so that's what she does. This photograph on the right is one of the publicity stills from that film. And this is a clipping from one of the last interviews she gave. And she famously says, it's a very famous quote from her. She tells the reporter, "When I die, my epitaph should be, I died 1,000 deaths." Because that was the story of all the characters in the films that she played. She died so often in such strange and terrible ways, but she always had that sense of humor about it, which comes through in this interview. So one other thing that I'll say, because 1960, she makes a comeback in Portrait in Black. The same producer, Ross Hunter, has bought the rights for Flower Drum Song, which he's going to make in 1961. And Anna May Wong has a part in it, and she's really jazzed about this. It's supposed to be the first film to have an all-Asian principal cast. And she's getting ready for it in the beginning of 1961. Unfortunately, weeks before they're supposed to start rehearsal, she passes. She dies in her sleep, very peacefully, of a heart attack, unlike all of her on-screen deaths. And so unfortunately, we never get to see her in that film. But I like to think about the fact that she died knowing she was going to be a part of history yet again. So it just tells you what a tenacious and incredible woman she was. And so that's my talk. Not Your China Doll is available wherever books are sold. I do know Vroman's has copies, so if you want to get a signed copy and don't have a copy today, come see me afterwards and we can figure something out. I also write a monthly newsletter called Half Caste Woman, so if you want to know more about Anna May Wong and some history deep dives I do around her, you can follow me there, and then those are all my social media handles. But thank you so much.
We have time for some questions, if we have any questions. Carol.
Did she grow up speaking Chinese?
So the question, did she grow up speaking Chinese? Yes. So in her household, her family was Cantonese, so they were from southern China. So they were from Toisan, which is a more smaller region of southern China. So they probably spoke a dialect of Taishanese, which is a dialect of Cantonese. So she spoke that at home, and she was supposed to go to Chinese school, but she ditched it a lot to go to the movies. So admittedly, her Chinese wasn't very good, and she kind of encounters that when she goes to China, because she meets some people who are from the South, and she says, oh great, can we speak in Cantonese? And then the other person says, actually, your American accent is so strong, can we just speak in English? And she, at one point she says, yeah, I never thought that anyone outside of my family could ever really understand me in Chinese, because she kind of spoke like maybe a somewhat familial or broken version of it. But she spoke enough, and she, throughout her film, she does use it occasionally for various lines. But you know, I don't speak Cantonese or Taishanese, even though that is actually my family heritage. So I've heard different things from different people who can't understand it, because some people will say, oh, it's gibberish, she's not saying anything. So hard to say.
Other questions?
What happened to her during the internment of the Japanese in like this era? Like, did she speak out? Did she?
She did not speak out, and you know, that era unfortunately really pit the Japanese Americans and Chinese Americans against each other, because at that time, I don't know if you're familiar, but many Chinese wore pins that said, I am Chinese, so that people understood, don't harass me.
Yeah.
And so there was a distance there. And, you know, there are also some kind of just old historical enmities between the two cultures. And so there's some uncomfortable things that happened during that era. And, you know, the other thing is that even the terms that people use, you refer to a Japanese person, I think you know what I'm talking about. That was very common in normal parlance, not even meant as a slur, I think, but just used normally. I mean, just the same way that the C word, this C-H-I-N-K word would often be used in newspapers. So, you know, the propaganda films she made were very anti-Japanese. And so sometimes in the advertisements you'll see, for those films, you'll see things that are very racist towards Japanese people. I think personally she was a little bit more neutral. There is an interview where she talks about how being angry at the Japanese or the Germans or whoever is not going to solve anything, and the only thing that would solve it is to have like love and compassion. So I'm sure it was something she struggled with, but at least she was thinking about it.
Go over here.
I'm sorry.
We'll do you first, and then we'll.
I can tell you the picture that you had with Fletcher Bowron, the mayor, he was extremely racist to the Japanese. In fact, he was, you know, he worked with the War Department to get everybody out. So that would have been a difficult position to put her in. But my question was, you have so many notations in the back of the book, like your research must have been stupendous.
Oh, yeah.
Where did you dig up, especially the primary source material for her, you know, exit visas to get to Canada and then to travel to Europe and that kind of stuff?
Yeah. I mean, well, the amazing thing is I'm still finding things. I mean, there's so much stuff, you know, luckily another biography had been written about 20 years ago, so that was a great roadmap. A lot of her correspondence with Carlin Decton is held at the Yale Library, so that was actually the first place I went. And you know, even though she's been dead for more than 60 years, she was a prolific writer in her own way. She has a very writerly sensibility, so she penned a number of essays herself for, you know, New York Herald Tribune or for movie magazines. Also, her interviews read as if she wrote them. And she has many, many interviews. So there's a lot of actually primary source material available, which I was so grateful for. And then, you know, like her, not immigration, but the Chinese inclusion files, those are all held at the National Archives. And I've yet to look through my own family's records as thoroughly as I have through hers. I have hers and all of her families. But those records, I mean, the only good thing about that whole law is that we have the records, and it's actually very illuminating in terms of what she had to go through, and knowing that she's like probably the most famous Chinese American person in this country, she still had to go through it, right? So just imagine what it was like for everyone else.
Over here.
Oh, a related question. Were her papers preserved, her own, you know, letters to her, or things she wrote? Did she have any papers, or were they just all lost?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's mostly lost. I mean, the family, I think for many reasons, wanted to be very private about her legacy after she passed. I mean, because she faced so much criticism in life, they were really wary of the press, and maybe wary of some of the more sensitive things that, which today we are not sensitive to, like the fact that she had affairs with married men. You know, that's, she's a celebrity.
Yeah.
That's like par for the course now. But things like that. So unfortunately, you know, unless they turn up someday, I don't know of any papers that were saved by the family. They do, however, have some artifacts, like her makeup box, cigarette case, and those have been donated to the Smithsonian. And so those occasionally go on display at the Smithsonian Museum in Washington. And they have some other effects. Actually, there's, how can I forget this? I co-curated an exhibition that's currently on at the Chinese American Museum downtown, which is free to the public. And there are a number of her personal items there from the family, including an ID bracelet, one of her makeup boxes, some family photographs. So there's some actually really interesting things there. Oh, as well as 2 of her dresses, which were donated by Lisa Liu.
I have a book inscribed to her from Manly Hall, called Philosophical Research Society. He wrote the story for one of those mysteries, 1938.
Okay.
That was actually done at Warner Brothers rather than Paramount.
Right.
1938.
Oh, you mean, it's called, it's the one about horoscopes. It's a horoscope mystery.
Yes, the one about the astrologer. She plays the
She's the astrologer and she solves the mystery by reading out what's horoscope.
Yeah.
It's called When Were You Born?
Yeah, she's an actual professional astrologer, and so
Yeah.
I needed somebody like Manly Hall to write.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, Manly Hall himself was a fascinating character.
Yeah.
I've only just looked into him a little bit.
That's a whole other presentation.
Exactly.
And the book was actually a limited edition, and he said it was just for his friends.
Wow.
So probably they actually have some contact. with friends.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to see pictures of it or something. I think that's really cool.
Carolyn.
If she had lived, would she have played the Juanita Hall role in Solidar's?
Yes, it's the one you
She
got.
would have sung
Hall
Chop
role.
Suey.
Yeah, she would have sung Chop Suey, the Madame Wing role. Yeah, they brought in Juanita because she played it in the stage, the Broadway version, yeah.
She was great.
Okay, we'll do Daria and then Susan, and then we'll wrap up.
I'm curious if you've been able to uncover records about her pay. Like, was she paid equal to actors equivalent? Is there information out there about her pay?
There are some records from like studio production files. The short answer is no. She was paid way less than other people. Even in Daughter of the Dragon, which is her starring vehicle, she was paid $6,000. Whereas I think Hayakawa was paid $10,000, and Warner Oland, who plays Fu Manchu in Yellowface, was paid $15,000 or $20,000. So much less, and nothing. Same. She had the same rate in Shanghai Express. She made the $6,000, which at that time was still an enormous sum. But just as a comparison, Marlene Dietrich made, I think, $90,000 to $100,000 on that. I mean, she had an insane contract with Paramount. So yeah, it was a world. So she was very shrewd with her money, right? She never. I mean, she scrimped and saved in the end. Like, she was very economical, but she was never poor, right? She owned property in Santa Monica, but she wasn't like the other Hollywood stars who just had like endless amounts of money.
And Susan.
I just want to say what a remarkable job you have done
Yeah.
with the research. Just absolutely remarkable. I'm in awe.
Thank you so much.
That's a great way to end. We didn't plan Susan to stay. So, well, thank you. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. Big round of applause for our speakers. I invite you to join us for our next book club program. We do have a program scheduled for next Monday. It's a virtual program, but I think we might have a challenge with a COVID diagnosis there. So we're not sure that program is actually going to be happening next week. But you can go online to bccbooks.org/programs to see all of the programs that we have. You can take one of the calendars from your table there to see what programs are coming up in the next 2 months. And then if you're subscribed to our newsletter, our weekly program calendar, you'll get a notice of all of our upcoming programs as well. Of course, you can register for all of our programs online at bccbooks.org/programs. Or you can contact me. I'm kevin@bccbooks.org. I'll tell you all about what's coming up and how you can get involved. Thanks everyone for joining us. Again, big round of applause for our speakers for your great talk. And we look forward to seeing you at another program soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.